Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I make circular fabric clusters to use in my slow stitching. Now, this is an activity that I can do without having a project in mind. Of course, you can always do it when you have a project in mind, but this is something I do when I want to use up some fabric scraps or I have a particular color combination I want to test out. And this is a combination of different textures, so I choose two different fabrics, usually contrasting, but again, you can modify this as you like. And then I add a piece of lace on top. Now the results are very rustic, very imperfect, but it's a stepping stone for another piece that I'll use this for. I usually make a batch at a time, so I'll do 3 and 4 at a time. They're just simple little projects that require choosing the fabric, designing it, and then adding a few stitches on top. Now once the fabric cluster is complete, I'll set it aside to use and work on a later time. I can combine the fabric clusters or use just one of them and add it to my slow stitching pieces. These clusters can be made in any size, so they can be very small or very large or anywhere in between. And here's how I do it.
So these are the fabric clusters that I make. I make them ahead of time and I have just a little bunch. I tend to do them in batches, so I'll have 3 or 4, as many as I want in a batch. And they all tend to be the same size. I can use them together in my work or individually as I see fit. It's really fun, it's simple, it's a great way to use up scraps. So let me show you how I do that. So the way I start this is I go through my fabric and I find pieces of fabric that inspire me or that I like. So I have this beautifully bold printed fabric with all these different colors and designs, so that'll be one fabric. And then to offset this, I wanted a neutral fabric. So I have this little beige piece here. When I decided that I was going to incorporate the beige instead of going with white, that dictated the lace colors that I wanted. So I have a bunch of tea-dyed lace and off-white lace, even some white lace here. And I'm just going to use that in my piece. Again, these are just little scraps, but you can use a full roll if you want. I have my base fabric. This is just some muslin, and it's some muslin that's been stained because I've done different things with it. But that's fine because it's just to hold my piece together. I chose a small piece because I'm just going to make a small circle. This is just a cap here. And then I have my thread that coordinates with my lace. But again, you can vary this however you like. I tend to make my clusters keeping them neutral, and then when I stitch them to my pieces, that's when I add the different colored stitching to make it really stand out. So the first thing I want to do is I just take my fabric here, I fold it up, my base fabric, just so that I can get a series of cuts. It's very thin fabric. You can use any fabric here. I just like this neutral colored muslin. And then I'll just sketch the circle around it. This is a heat erasable pen, so when I'm done, if there's any marks that remain, I can just take an iron and get rid of them. And then I just cut out, and here I'm cutting out just 4 layers because it's very thin, and I cut them out at once. If the fabric was thicker, I do 1 at a time or even 2 at a time. It really depends. And I'm not going for perfection with the circle, but I'm doing my best. So then I have my circles, and I can start with here. And this is where it starts to get fun. So I'll just set aside my lace because that's the last layer that I put on. And then I like to separate my base pieces. It gives me an idea of what I have. And I tend to start with my bold colors. If they were both bold color fabrics, it doesn't matter what you start with. This one is particularly interesting because it's got all these little pieces here like a patchwork, so I can really play around with it and get a lot of different looks. I can use just one and really play and really just choose the colors that I want. So I'll cut this fabric into little pieces so I have a bunch of snippets to work with, and then I can decide how I want to put it on my fabric circles. So now I just have all my fabric pieces, and I don't need too many of them. I just cut a bunch of them, and I can decide if I want to have it dedicated to a particular color of fabric or if I want to use different colors. like here. And I like the different colored look. I just think it adds a lot of interest. So I'll put a few down here on my pieces. Can even combine just a few. And then once I have my colored fabric pieces down, just in something interesting, and as you can see, they overlap, they overhang the circle, and I'll play with that step later. But right now, I'm just doing the collage work. So I'll take some of my neutral fabric as well, cut it up, and use just little bits and pieces here. What I'm trying to do is add interest. The lines don't have to be perfectly straight. They can have lots of curves to them. I'm just trying to add some interest to my piece. One of the things I like to do is sometimes take the fabric, make a natural shape with curves instead of straight edges, and then cut out a shape in the center. And I can use that in my work as well. Just think that adds something of interest to your piece. And it looks nice with the contrast here. And I'll just continue to play around. Because I used so many straight edges originally, I think I'll add some curved edges here. And I can use the curve of the circle as a guide, or I can completely overhang it. So now I have my 4 collages. Again, they're still in the rough edge state. I have a lot of overhang, but I kind of like the way it's starting to develop. These are great base pieces to use in my slow stitching. And now I get to take my lace scraps and see where I want to incorporate them. The beauty of adding the lace is some of the colors underneath and the prints really peek through. So that makes it very interesting. I can see how I want to add this. Maybe it's too much, a whole piece, so I'll just cut it. And again, I like these unusual shapes. Maybe have that hang off this way so I can see a little more here. And I can play around with it. All these different laces give a different effect, and I kind of like the way that looks. If I have too many straight edges, I'll just trim those off. Maybe something very simple for this one. There's a lot going on here. And now I want to add a little lace to this piece over here. So I've been adding lace on top, but I think I'll just stick that in the bottom here. So now at this point, you can take your pieces and decide if you want to trim them up, remove any fraying, change the shape of the edge. And I like to leave a lot of overhang because I know I can always trim it off later. After I've done that for all the pieces, trimming any edges or straightening out any curves or creating more curves, I'll just take my cluster and I can take it and pin it down into place if I need to. So I'll just take a pin, and I don't like to work with too many pins. But then I'll take some thread, and I chose that thread that matched the lace. And I like to start by just stitching through the back of the cluster. I don't have to go on the edge here, so I'll just choose a spot, usually just slightly off center. Flip it over, and now I'll just add stitches just to unite the piece and hold all the pieces in place so that I can remove that pin. My goal doesn't have to be decorative, although you certainly can make it decorative at this point, but my stitches are designed with the intention of just holding everything in place and being utilitarian. You can use embroidery floss and make some very elegant stitches, or you can just use stitches just enough to hold it in place. And that's what I like to do, because I'll add my decorative stitches when I use this in my work, when I stitch it down ultimately to my background piece. Now for today, I'm just going to stitch these pieces, and I'll show you what they look like. And then I can add them to my stash and keep them for when I'm doing a slow stitching project, and I need a little element to add to my work. Now these are great clusters to make when you have the time, you have the scraps, and you don't really know what to do. You can just stitch a few together, keep them in your stash, and then you'll have a bunch ready to use. So I'll finish stitching all these down and show you what they look like. So now all the clusters are stitched down, just enough to really hold it in place. And as you can see on the back, it's not the most beautiful thing, but the front is very effective and it's very secure, which is what I want. So now I can set these aside to use them in projects. Now, depending on the colors that you use, that will depend on the projects you use them in. The beauty of this is you can use any size circle. I happen to use the smaller one because that's the size I wanted to work with today, but you can make them any size you'd like. So depending on the colors you use, whether you use quiet and soft colors or bolder colors, you get different results. I happen to like the contrast of the lace, which has the texture and the openness and the airiness against that fabric behind it. And the round shape makes it rather interesting because you can always stack them together, combine them, or add additional fabric to unite them. And that's what is so nice, is that it gives you lots of options to use in your final piece.
So that's how I make the fabric clusters. You can choose your clusters based on the fabric you have available to you. I made a neutral and I made a really bold and brightly colored one, and I really liked both of them. I'll see how I use them in my work in the future. I created a quick little page just to show you some ideas, because when you incorporate stitching on top of it, you get a whole new look for your clusters. I hope this has inspired you, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe.